Hello YouTube, Robert Alvarez, the Psychic Witch. Also known as Mr. Lighting and a Fan, but there is no fan right now because it's a bit chilly. Now, let me show you something. One would think it's sunny outside. It's cloudy as fuck. Not sunny. In fact, it's still raining. Isn't that crazy? I'm like, what the hell? So just so y'all think it's like bright and sunny outside, no it's not. And those of you that live in the New York City area like I do, you know it's not bright and sunny outside. Anyway, so one of my favorite people, Shell, also known as Swan of Dreamers, posted a lovely comment on yesterday's video, or last night's video, whatever you want to call it, how I became a card reader. And then I realized there's more to the story. Like I said to Warrior Goddess, or rather like I had stated to Warrior Goddess in a comment, I'm like, wait a minute, it's been a while since I've thought about this story, and clearly it's been so long that I forgot there was more to the story. So this is the part 2. So, so I remember there was a time when I used to have 2 part-time positions of employment in 2 different shoe stores. Both shoe stores were different companies, and both shoe stores were closed on Sundays. So I was like, okay. So I remember on Sundays I would go to this wonderful cafe in my area. It was called Tabak. It was not affiliated with the Tabak in Manhattan, but it was wonderful. And at the time, I was a massive teetotaler. You know, I've been to cafes over the years when I almost never drank coffee. And, you know, I try not to think about all the great coffees I could have had. But this place had coffee up the yin-yang. Seriously, they had an extensive selection of coffees and teas. But I always drank tea. Ironically, I almost never drink tea now, unless it's like iced tea or something like that. Anyway, so I would go there, and I would usually bring a book to read and my journal. I would have tea and I would have cheesecake. And I loved the place. I missed the place frequently because it was a great place to hang out. I loved you know, the energy of the place. I love the location. I love the convenience of getting there. I mean, really, it's a place that I could have walked to it if I wanted to. It was roughly 4 miles. No. 20 city blocks is equivalent to a mile. So it was roughly 3 to 3.5 miles away from where I live. But, you know, walk 1 block to a bus stop, and actually 2 blocks to a bus stop in my area, and then take one of the buses, and I would be there in 20 minutes, maybe half an hour if the traffic was really heavy. Whatever. 15 minutes if it was really light, but I digress. So I loved this place, loved the service, loved the prices, loved the teas, loved the cheesecakes. Black Forest cheesecake. Anyway, so I remember I had a best friend at the time, and she wanted me to give her a reading with the tarot. I said, sure. So I asked her, did you want it here, meaning her apartment, or did you want it at the cafe? She was like, no, at the cafe. I said, okay, fine. So we order our refreshments. We're waiting for, you know, they brought them over, and then I start the reading. So I remember Eddie, who was the owner, was very intrigued by this. He in fact, he was walking out to do what, you know, restaurant owners do, because restaurant owners are always in and out, at least the ones in this area. And he had a look on his face, which wasn't a bad look. It was something that pleasantly surprised him. And I couldn't stop talking about it to my friend. And she was like, well, why don't you talk to him? I think she was getting sick and tired of how I kept going on and on and on about how excited I was. Just from that one look. Go figure. So she was like, why don't you go talk to him about giving readings there? I said, okay, I can do that. Because that was her way of saying, Robert, I love you. Shut the fuck up about this. Anyway, so long story shorter, I spoke to Eddie about giving readings there, and he said, well, why don't you give readings at the poetry open mic? I said, sure. So I did. And I also, read some of my poetry, which was nice. And then I remember I was very excited. I usually preferred to give readings when nobody was reading their poetry, and that it worked out pretty well, because that way everybody that deserved attention for their poetry received their attention. Now here's the funny thing. So I was about to begin my fourth reading of the night, and it was around midnight, and all of a sudden the lights went out, and I just said, I didn't do that. I wanted everybody to know I did not do that. And it was funny because the client leaned over to me and she said, everybody looked over here. I said, I know. That's why I said I didn't do that. And that was how I began giving readings professionally. My talents and my skill in giving readings was a little better than how I described it in How I Became a Card Reader Part 1. And what happened was that, at the time, I was also, even though I was better at giving readings, I was very unskilled in, I'm going to say, for lack of a better term or phrase, the business side of being a professional psychic. Because at the time, I charged, I think it was $5 for a no time limit tarot reading. And it was funny because even people who were not going to have a reading with me were like, yeah, that's too low. You need to charge more. And it was so strange. I found it strange and yet fascinating that people who were not going to have a reading with me, were not going to have a reading with anybody else, were like, yeah, that's too low. You need to charge more. But what I began learning very early on was that as I would raise my fees, I would A, attract more clientele, and B, the clientele that would drain my energies would start to not be a part of my life. And all these years later, I've noticed that every single time I've raised my fees, and for the record, I don't raise my fees because I have a car payment due or because I need to pay the light bill. I raise my fees solely when I'm divinely guided. And if I'm not sure, I'll ask the goddess and her angels, okay, would it be in my best interest to raise my fees? Is this the time to raise my fees? And make no mistake, I always receive a clear and evident sign that it's either yes, this is the time, or no, it's not. Although strangely enough, every time I've asked the question, well, the 2 times that I've asked the question in my professional life, I've gotten a yes. The 1 time that I asked a professional psychic the question, I got a yes. But I again, for me, I'm not going to raise my fees because I have a bill due, or because I'm short money, or because somebody seems to have more money than others. I remember there was somebody with whom I was considering creating a professional arrangement, and I was surprised when he told me that he would charge people that had more money a higher fee. And I didn't realize it at the time, but I thought to myself, there's something wrong about that for me. And for me, there's something wrong about that. I want to clarify that. I do not believe in being some kind of police authority for professional psychics. I'm not going to do that. I have often quoted Louise L. Hay, and that is that another person's fees are none of my business. Because, again, going back to, my upbringing and my mentality and my personality, unless I am sharing a life, a home, and a bed with you, I don't want to know how much you're making, because I'm not going to see shit. Really, like if you tell me, well, I make $50,000 a year, big deal. Are you giving me some of that? No. Why? Because we don't share a life, a home, and a bed. So as far as I'm concerned, what you make is none of my business, and what you make don't mean shit to me. Because am I going to see it? No. So don't tell me. I mean, granted, I do have long-time clients. I know what they do professionally, so I have an idea as to what they make. But I'm not going to say to them, well, how much do you make? Because it's none of my business. Anyway, but I digress. So, what happened was that there was one time I was giving 2 people a reading. And it was a no time limit tarot reading. It was whatever you want to pay reading. And there were 2 women who were having lunch, and one of them had come over. Oh, this was still at the cafe. And one of them had come, actually a friend of theirs had come over and said, they'd love to have a reading with you. Do you know when you're going to be available? And I said, well, I really don't know, because I'm still in the middle of this one's reading, and her reading has yet to begin. And then at one point, I was in the middle of the second reading and looked up and saw they were gone. And, for a long time, I really was angry at myself about that. And I was just like, man, and I was beginning to really, really get that I needed to create boundaries. I needed to say, okay, well, this is how much a reading with me is in this place. And then at the time, I only would give readings there anyway. So, but I was like, okay, this is how long your reading is going to be. And that helped me. It really did, because it also helped people see, okay, you're not going to walk all over the man who would become Robert Alvarez, a psychic witch. And it really wasn't even like that in my consciousness, in my mind. It was like, okay, I need to create some boundaries. I need to set some guidelines, because, it's not going to work for anybody if people are just walking out because they can't have a reading with me. And that was what led to me becoming a professional psychic. And of course, I mentioned in last night's, or the previous, I'll call it the previous video because it's easier that way. I mentioned, meeting a community relations manager of a Barnes & Noble bookseller store, and I mentioned how that opened some wonderful new doors for me. But this was really how it really started for me. And I continued to give readings there professionally from time to time, and not just during the open mic poetry reading nights. In fact, it got to the point where now I would go there on Sundays, because I was the 2 stores where I worked as a clerk were closed on Sundays, so I would still go to Tabak on Sundays. I would still have my tea. I would still have my cheesecake. I'd still bring a book. I'd still bring a journal. And now I would bring tarot cards. And the servers were really great. They would usually have 1 or 2 servers working that day, because it wasn't like a huge rush crowd. Most of the time in this cafe, a lot of the regulars would show up when they would show up. So, and if it really got swamped, Eddie, who was the owner, or his girlfriend, whose name escapes me at the moment, if she was off from work, she would come in, and so there were plenty of people that were there to serve patrons if it got really busy. But it really was a wonderful experience, and sometimes I miss those days of when it was less busy. But I still think of this cafe with great fondness, because it was just like, it was a really great place. Anyway, so thank you for watching this video. Thank you again, Warrior Goddess, for a great comment and a great idea. Please feel free to make any comments, ask any additional questions about my professional life, and if you have any ideas for future videos, let me know. I'm in a period right now where I can catch up on videos. After the middle of November, it gets tricky, and certainly from middle of November to early, mid, and late January of 2016, it gets really tricky, because January is my birthday month, so you know. Anyway, so thank you very much. Have a great day, regardless of the weather in your area, and I wish all of you many, many blessings.